Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, that's good. I thought this would be, you guys are energized. We don't need lunch, so we're good. All right. Yeah. So thanks, Petey, and thanks, Brian, for being here. Maybe I'll start with you, Brian, before we get into your automation and ML and this whole journey. Tell us a little bit about when did you learn about this whole thing of RPA? How did you learn about it? And why did you think it was relevant at all?
Yeah, so I'm relatively new to CenturyLink. I joined the company about 2 years ago. I spent about 18 years over at Verizon, and so we were doing a lot of digital transformation at Verizon. And when I came to CenturyLink, they asked me to stand up a transformation team and really just kind of look at how we can drive cost out of the business. And CenturyLink historically is a company that's comprised of multiple acquisitions, and so as you can imagine, we have a lot of systems that are out there that that our agents are using and our employees are using, and there's a lot of repetitive tasks. And so as we start looking at ways that we can drive efficiencies within the business unit as we're going through a much larger digital transformation initiative that IT is basically managing, RPA really just kind of it affords us the ability to do that type of automation within the business unit while, like I said, IT is out working on some of the larger digital transformation initiatives. So if you kind of look at what some of our call center agents are doing and some other field technicians throughout the business, there's a lot of swivel chair and a lot of copy-paste repetitive tasks that they're doing, and so it really just fits perfect with some of the capabilities that RPA offers us. So.
Okay, PD, is that a pretty standard challenge that you see in a lot of your customers? Is that your value proposition at UiPath?
Yep. So there's a lot of scale up that we are seeing right now. RPA as an industry is maturing, and so we're seeing more and more customers, the likes of CenturyLink, which are putting more and more robots in production, automating more of the processes, and it's really healthy to see the application of RPA across the board, across different verticals. We are working with, consumer companies, oil and gas, banking and finance, and so there's a lot of potential to automate all the mundane tasks that are there. At some point, that's where me and Brian were chatting just before the panel that you need to start thinking about more holistically applying RPA in your company. So you need things like the centers of excellence around that, but also just we know the business of enterprise software, the way you deploy it, the way you manage it, and so having all those pieces in place for things that you're deploying in an RPA setting is also going to be useful.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think the comment that you made about scaling is really the crucial one. Before I move to Brian, let me just ask our audience, how many of you have some RPA deployments active in your organization?
Nice.
So pretty much, I'd say 70-80%. How many of you think that those RPA deployments have been scaled up completely? Mm-hmm. And that's the challenge,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's exactly what we are finding in our research as well, is that if you we polled 500 odd global 2000 enterprises, and less than 10% of them have scaled this thing up, right? So Brian, tell us a little bit about why is scaling this thing so hard, right? What have you done?
Yeah, so we've done quite a bit, and in fact, we set some really tough challenges at the beginning of our RPA journey, where we wanted to do 50 bots in 60 days, right? So not all of them were very complex; some of them were much simpler, but it really kind of got us to think about what are the things that we need to do from a management perspective. What are the right resources we need to have in place? What's the right stage gate process that we need to have in place? And just how do we manage that overall program, right? And so if you think about our stage gate process, it's the discovery phase. What are those opportunities that you're trying to automate? Doing the financial assessment on those, developing your process design documentation, looking at your solution design documentation, giving that to a solutions architect, putting it into the DevOps model, and then you're deploying it to production, and then basically post-production support. when you start trying to do that at scale, you find yourself constantly setting up calls and trying to bring teams together to really just get approval on the finances, or trying to develop the solution document, or look at the existing flows. And so one thing that we did up front was, at the very beginning, was started automate. We were trying to manage all this through a SharePoint site, and we built our own proprietary system for managing the entire stage gate operation that has automation built into it. So when you think about, if you're someone that is responsible for approving the cost benefits, right? It's no longer getting everybody on a call and having that conversation, because when you're developing 20 bots, 25, 30 bots in parallel, there's just not enough people and not enough resources to do that. So we have things like stage gate notifications that would say, hey, PD, you're responsible for approving the finance on this. You get an automated notification, you go into the system, you have your own dashboard, you approve those or disapprove those. And so I think that part was a big part of being able to scale. It's also about getting the right resources in place. And so some of the lessons learned that we had was, we were trying to outsource some of those resources. And if you think about we had some vendors that were providing process analyst roles, and we had vendors that were doing solutions architecture roles. There was a steep learning curve there, and then some of those folks that we brought in, they would leave the vendor. It'd take them about 4 to 6 months to get kind of brought up to speed, and then they would leave. And so we learned that some of those critical roles we needed to bring in-house. But so you don't have time for people to leave after you get them brought up to speed.
Right.
Trying to think what else. So I mean, that was just being able to try to do that volume at scale. Yeah. It gets very difficult. And one thing I should probably mention, when we got up about 100 bots is really when things started changing, because you're trying to run the day-to-day operation, right? And you think you have this team staff to go run the factory, and you got this intake and governance process that's coming out. You got development that's going on in the factory, and then you have the next one coming in. What we found is, after about 100 bots, we started, a lot of those developers were doing maintenance on existing bots. And so we kind of had to shift and stand up a maintenance crew that just manages the day-to-day operation of those bots, because it could be, something could change in Salesforce, or something could change in one of the other tools that the bot is interfacing with, and you have to go maintain that.
No, I think you make some really crucial points there, right? I think what's happened, unfortunately, is that technology has overpowered the narrative, and we all have forgotten the people and process. Remember the original people process technology, right? And we just talk about technology. And I think what you were mentioning, you've got a process now, and then you're looking at resources or people. And I think those are the two sort of missing elements to scale up. But PD, from a technology vendor perspective at UiPath, how are you, or what can you or your community, right, of other technology vendors do to help manage this challenge of scaling up?
So, the challenge that the RPA industry is facing right now is pretty typical of any early industry. So we are going through different maturity phases. Now that we have proven the use of this technology, the utility of it in a small scale setting, now it's all about scaling that. And so the set of tools and the technologies that you will bring to bear to do that scaling is drastically different from what you would use in an earlier stage. So you to build, it's like, it's essentially like peeling an onion. You have layers and layers of more manageability around the thing. For example, for all the things that Brian was mentioning about, there's a slide that I would love to show. So we are thinking of it more as an integrated system. And so if you think of any enterprise software that has been built, either ERP, CRM, take the case of any one of them, you need to build it integrated with all the other functional pieces in your organization. So for example, the stuff that Brian was talking about with the process analytics, you need to be able to, so for example, in CenturyLink, I'm pretty sure there are some processes that are well-defined, but then there are processes which are not so well-defined. You have to go in, work with the SMEs to come up to, what is the process definition document for that process even look like. So we have a big initiative going on right now in a set of tools to build out that capability. You will be able to identify these processes, and the whole point of that initiative is that we want to bring down the time and the cost to identify the processes to automate, right? So once you have that, then you need to have a measurement system in place, which will tell you, it's basically a radar that you need, right? You're basically managing a whole fleet of these robots. So you need some kind of a monitoring system that will tell you if it's adding positive ROI to your business or not. So once the processes are identified, you actually put it in production, now you need to have integrated analytics is in place. And when we talk about analytics, it's not just your traditional BI. In RPA, the analytics is a little bit different because you might need to bring in business variables from your other systems. So for example, if Brian is trying to automate the call centers and there's a specific KPI that is stored in one of the call center applications, you will need to marry it with your robot logs to see, oh yeah, if we automated this system, we are actually saving these many hours and these many dollars. So that's where the analytics comes in. And then the whole point with the RPA stuff is this is like still traditional software where it goes logistical, it goes step by step. But in order to do the smarter things, you need to bring in the AI pieces. But the AI pieces should be so easily transferable into the workflows. And so that's why we are building what we call the AI fabric, where you can drop in components pretty intuitively. So even an RPA developer can do that. You don't need a data scientist. But if you have a data science team in your enterprise which is building certain models, the hardest problem that we've seen for our customers there is they lack this, what we call the last mile vehicle. So we are bridging that last mile gap and closing the whole loop. So once you start closing the loop here, you have a virtuous cycle. So you'll do more automation, you'll see the effects of it, you can give the data to your CFO, prove that automation is really working, and just keep on going to add more and more value to your organization.
Yeah. No, that's... Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I should probably mention when we were talking about scale, that was one thing that we had to kind of step back and start documenting what our coding standards are and what our logging standards are, because we were doing some software development in-house, and we had a couple vendors that were also participating. But all of our bots, when I talked about that intake and governance tool, those bots actually report into our a BI section within that tool. So when you're going through the financial assessment, you say, hey, this bot, it runs 400 times a month. The person does this task. It takes them 15 minutes at this hourly rate. All that's built into that financial section. And then as the bots go into production, they're just looking and they're ringing the register and they're plotting out real time on, to your point, right? I need to know that this bot, I predicted it was going to do this, and I got to report that back to the finance team. And being able to do that has helped us to gain funding back from the finance operation, right? So it's not a financial exercise every time that we want to look at how beneficial the bots have been. It's going to the dashboard and getting real-time data around how efficient those bots are.
Yeah, so I think both of you have highlighted two fairly simple but very important things that when we talk to a lot of clients sort of miss is, one is the people process technology, trifecta, right? And people and process is often ignored. And then on the technology front, I think what you were mentioning, PD, is this AAA trifecta of automation, analytics, and AI, right? I think all these things will need to come together to really solve and make meaningful change. But Brian, let's talk about this AAA trifecta, right? Of we've talked about you've got to some scale on RPA. What's your roadmap, right? How do you make these bots more smarter, intelligent? Are you infusing ML, AI, what have you?
Yeah, we are. So I'll just give one example of where we're looking at using AI and ML. And so we're a communications company. We have a network that spans across 60 countries. And something that's important for us when you look at some of the big carriers who are offering streaming services, their services work right across our network, right? So we have to constantly monitor that bandwidth and that traffic. And so being able to watch this traffic real time and use AI and ML to maybe divert traffic. And so our peak times kind of start about 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. on the East Coast, right? And they go to about 1 a.m. And when the kids come home from school and they start streaming on their game consoles or Netflix and some of these other data consuming providers, we have to, in today's world, oftentimes we're we're monitoring that traffic and seeing where we have to shift from maybe Washington, D.C. to Chicago or Chicago to Atlanta, those types of things. And so we're looking at capturing that data and using those tools to be able to automatically reroute traffic. And so we're doing some of that today. We kind of dipped our toes in it. But on our roadmap, we'll be really just letting the automations and using those tools to do that long term.
Okay. And PD, give us a sneak peek into what's UiPath's product roadmap, right? You've given us a little bit of it from here, but what's the sort of near-term and the long-term vision?
Yep. So on the AI front, I can tell you we are doing heavy investments on R&D. And so there's a whole new set of capabilities that we are building over there. So we are executing on what we call the 4 main pillars of AI. One of the main things that we want to focus on is what we call visual understanding. So RPA is all about understanding what is on the screens, but at a deeper level where you can understand what the applications people are interacting with. And it should be seamless across the different platforms you're working with. VDI, Citrix, remote desktop, it should work seamlessly. So we have a lot of computer vision investments going into making that thing as robust as possible. So when you're putting your robots into production, let's say a Windows update comes in and updates 10,000 of your PCs, and now your robots start breaking. They should be intelligent enough and robust enough to be able to see, if it's just a modal dialog saying a Windows update happened, just click on OK and move on, right? So giving this inherent capability to make RPA robots robust is one of the main pillars of visual understanding. The second thing that we are looking at, which a lot of customers are asking for, is documents. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, almost everyone is going in and building huge amount of capabilities to do intelligent OCR. But when we look at the end user use cases, we think that there's a workbench that is required in the industry. So for example, if you're a large oil and gas company, there are drilling reports coming in from 15,000 of your drillers in all different formats, digital, non-digital. You need to be able to parse them to put into the specific system. So just having an OCR system doesn't really work. Those of us who work with AI and machine learning, we know, the system is never going to be 100% accurate. So even if it's 60, 70, 80, 90% accurate, how do you deal with the things that are not handled by the AI system? So you need to think more properly about bringing the humans in the loop at the right time, in the right manner. So that's what is coming in the document understanding space. We are also building, underlying on top of all this is something we call AI Fabric, where you should be able to easily drag and drop AI models into the automation. So you don't need to be a data scientist. Essentially what we are seeing is there are COEs in our large customers, which are COEs for automation, and then you have the data science teams. And how do we marry them together? Because the biggest problem data science guys face is that last mile, the thing that they cannot do. In AI Fabric, we are the main driving position behind it is something we call BYOM, bring your own model. If you build certain models, like we were working with a large automotive manufacturer who had a data science team which had built a model around predictive maintenance on their manufacturing line. So in that setting, what we needed to do was bring in that model to the frontline worker. So you needed RPA to take inputs from that machine learning model and show it to the workers when it was detecting that there was going to be a fault on the manufacturing line. And so marrying those two things together using a seamless thing is going to be a big thing for the industry. And so that's what we are betting a lot on, that this RPA plus AI trend that we are starting with bring your own model. You can bring in any model from your partners, customers, or first-party models from us, is going to be one of the game changers for the industry.
Okay, no, that's very interesting. And I wanted to ask the audience for some questions, but just one final question from me is, I don't think in today's world, anyone can be everything to anyone, right? So you need some sort of an ecosystem, right? Not just to sell this thing, but also to build this, right? To build the capabilities. So what are you doing in terms of an ecosystem development at UiPath?
So we already have something which we call the Go Marketplace. So we have a marketplace where we work with a lot of partners. So we work with all the companies listed even in this conference. 80 to 90% of them are already our partners, the likes of DataRobot, Clarify, Petum. So any of these large AI companies are our partners. So we can easily ingest models from them into our AI Fabric. And so We are, at the end of the day, a partner-first company. So we have about 300 different technology partners that we're interacting with. And so the partner ecosystem is inherently important to us. But we will go in and address the gaps where we're seeing large customer gaps. We either work with the partners because we share this data closely. We are, at the end of the day, a very open company. We were the first ones to put the RPA tools out there in the hands of normal developers with the community offering, where nobody else was doing that. And so we're going to keep doing it in the RPA space also. Anything that we release, like we released an invoices and receipts parser about 15 days ago. It's one of the first components in the RPA industry that any RPA developer can download and see how it works in their specific settings. So having the openness of that ecosystem is super important to us, but also onboarding the partners and keeping our partners informed about our product roadmap and informed about our customer needs is super important.
Got it. And Brian, the same question, right? As a client, how do you look at your ecosystem of partners for this? Because I'm assuming you also cannot do everything in-house.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we have several partners from a software perspective that we're integrating with, and we have several vendor partners that we're working with on software development. So, we're going to continue, when you look at the future, we're going to continue to drive RPA as short-term solutions while we're working on larger digital transformation initiatives to replace some of those systems I talked about earlier. But when you really look at our roadmap, I mean, we're going to continue driving RPA over the next 5 years. Is kind of, we already have that 5-year roadmap kind of mapped out,
Okay.
right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Any questions?
So you said you did, I think it was like 50 automations in 60 days.
Yeah, that was the target. We probably landed about low 40s, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you go about educating your organization on what was a good fit for RPA?
Yeah, so we kind of stuck with some of the simple, things that you're doing, copy and paste, things that are swivel chair. We kind of narrowed it into a couple. So one thing I didn't talk about is we had a federated model and a centralized model that we were running in parallel. The 50 bots in the 60 days was within that federated model, and so they were agents that are taking phone calls from customers who are providing technical support for high-speed internet, right? And so we narrowed in on that organization, and we talked about the swivel chair and integrated with certain systems. So we kind of narrowed it in and said, all right, all the swivel chair that we're doing between these 5 systems, we're going to narrow our scope and focus just on that. And then think of those use cases where you have to go here to get data, you have to go here to get data, and here to get data. And then we kind of did a different approach. You're going to hear oftentimes, you'll hear about attended and unattended bots. In our environment, we were doing unattended bots, but we built a layer on top of that is in a common desktop so that those agents, when they click that button, it actually calls the unattended bot. And so we were able to create the virtual machine that mirrors what all 4,000 agents are looking at every day, and then automating those tasks. So, does that help? Okay.
So,
Sure. Okay, yeah, this one's more for PD. So for the average business user who wants to implement a bot, who really doesn't want to use a center of excellence, what kind of enhancements are coming into play that just simplify the scripting of an RPA? A self-scripting bot that just observes the user for a while, then figures out how to implement. Where are you in that?
That is a really good question, and it is one of those utopian things that we are looking at, where imagine if there was a system which just observes the users, what they are doing, and automatically builds a bot for you. So I can tell you, it's confidential, but probably I can talk about it.
let's start tweeting. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
live tweeting what UiPath is going to do. But in the process understanding space, so we are thinking of this problem in 2 stages. As I was saying, and Brian also was talking about, there are SMEs that you would have which do the things in a certain way, and you want to automate them. So you go to those subject matter experts. We will have a component which you can install, and the subject matter expert can just go out clicking around, and it will automatically generate a PDD for you. That's something that is coming out in end of August. And so you can take that PDD and give it to your RPA developers to automate the stuff, or you can plug the output of it straight into our studio, and we'll build you a skeleton bot for that. So that's one part of it. But the second part that Brian was mentioning, if you have an organization, let's say of 4,000 agents that are working on different things, we are working on technologies which we call unattended recording, where you can basically send out a bunch of these recorders. Let's say you want to sample 500 of your agents. And what it will do is it will observe a whitelisted set of applications and come back to you and say, did you know that they're using Genesis for 6 hours a day, and they're using like these 3 exact buttons in Genesis for 4 out of those 6 hours. And now you can start thinking of, oh, I didn't even know that these were the most frequently used applications. So once you get those insights, then you can start doing more and more there. But eventually the utopia is that the algorithms, the machine learning, that the AI would be strong enough where it automatically can learn what are these different patterns. But as a technology, as a research area, I can tell you we are not there yet, but we will give the tools. We have a path to progression to giving the smarts in this area to lower the barrier of entry and reduce that friction.
So your teaser coming out in August.
Yep. Yep.
All right, so I think we've got 1 minute left, maybe the last question.
So I think this is for PD. What's your strategy for those non-enterprise customers, to call it SMB, SME segments, if you will, those that cannot afford a true COE approach in terms of a build out of a capability, or what kind of support do you offer for that?
So right now, the community version of our product, anyone can download it and build robots around that. And so we will keep supporting that. But as you can imagine, there are customers like CenturyLink that we have to service. So we have an interesting challenge as a company on our hands where we do want to service the small people, and we small business people and the individual developers and the RPA developers who are just learning this stuff, right? We were one of the first ones to open our RPA Academy to every developer who wants to go do this stuff. So we'll keep that open. But as Saurabh was talking about, RPA as an industry is maturing. So we also need to provide tools for better manageability, robustness to the large customers. And so those are, just to tell you from my, what keeps me up at night are balancing those two acts. And we hope to keep parallelly executing on both of those axes.
All right. So to conclude, Brian, one practical advice that you would like to share. Just one. Huh?
Just one. Partner closely with security in the beginning, because they don't like assigning usernames and passwords to unattended or to robots, right? And so you can find yourself further down the journey if you wait too long, and then you run into security issues. So security should be your friend right out of the gate.
Okay. And PD, I can't let you go without asking UiPath's valuation.
Well, the public numbers are somewhere around
7 billion?
Yes.
7 billion. How much of that, in your view, is hype, and how much of that is real?
Well, I'll tell you what my job is. My job is to justify, validate, and increase that number, right? And so I can tell you from the ARR numbers, the valuation, if you look at enterprise companies that are going IPO right now, if you look at Zoom and Slack and everyone else, we are actually undervalued right now. So Slack is getting close to 20x the ARR. So by that measure, even going by our older ARR for the last year, we should have been a $15 to $20 billion company. So we, again, that is not something that we focus on, but the challenges that we give to our teams and people, we are an interesting company in the sense that we are always looking forward to what is the next step for us, right? So yes, the valuation reached $7 billion, but now we are thinking of how do we become a $50 billion company? And once you start thinking on those lines, we probably reach 15 somewhere by the end of next year, or even more. But that's how we think of, we think of the steps in exponential things. Like it's more about doubling and tripling the value rather than just saying, how can we increase the value that we provide or the revenue that we have by like single-digit or double-digit percentage increments.
All right, so talking about next steps, I think it's time to move to the next session. But thank you, gentlemen. This was a
you.
very good
Thank
chat.
you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brian.